Torval Point, where we are today, was selected as a site for the Operations Training Centre involving all three branches of the Australian services, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force. In due course, after infrastructure had been established, landing craft, Navy units and tank units began to arrive here for combined exercises. The purpose, of course, being that with the Japanese advancing into the Pacific, we were going to have to face the prospect of more direct conflict with the enemy in that particular area. Initially, there were exercises involving Australian Navy, Army and Commando personnel, and this area, including Bribie Island in the background, became the initial focal point for those particular amphibious training exercises. As time went by, and particularly after Pearl Harbor, of course, in December 1941, American activity in the area began to increase also. And in due course, American landing craft and Navy personnel began to arrive at Torval Point in increasing numbers.
It's very pleasing to be here today as to one of the final events of our year, and that is the unveiling of a monument to those who served in this area at Torval Point, just opposite Bribie Island, during World War II, when it was first used as a training facility for American and Australian forces prior to their going to New Guinea and the islands north of New Guinea to fight the Japanese. At the end of towards the end of the war, the facilities that we had here weren't so valid because most of the troops had learnt amphibious training and practiced their drills here on the shores around Torval Point. They went off and eventually a water transport training centre was set up here. And the monument that's to be unveiled today is a tribute to those who passed through this way in those years between 42 particularly and 1945. But we think today is one of the final segments of our program. We've only got a couple more to go, which will conclude our year of Australia Remembers.
Major Rodriguez, Colonel Fowles, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. History will record us being here today as a result of the history that was made some time ago, beginning in a decision in 1942 by the Australian Defence Authorities to establish a combined operations centre here at Torval Point. This was a very significant event in the history of World War II. The centre was vital to repel the Japanese in their Pacific campaign. Combined operations meant training for coordinated simultaneous operations by the three fighting services, Navy, Army and Air Force, which saw many thousands of Americans and Australians at the centre during the various stages of the operation. In the beginning, the soldiers were mainly Middle East veterans on their way to New Guinea. Later, US troops replaced them. During the operations, it was not uncommon sight to see the RAF Wirraway and Boomerang airplanes doing simulated bombing flights over the passage. And I might just add here that how times change. Since those times 50 odd years ago, it's now an environmental and national park, and you can't throw a stone in there, let alone a bomb. But nevertheless, it did perform an important part in training for the Wirraways and the Boomerangs, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware that two of the samples of these aircrafts, or one each I should say, are here in Caboolture, and it's quite a unique situation. Tank squadrons of the 40th Armoured Brigade arrived in mid-1943s in preparation for exercises on Bribie Island. Some would remember the brigade's 28-tonne Matilda tanks, which were transported from Singleton, New South Wales on flat trucks to Caboolture. This was after a loading procedure which was described as hair-raising. The tanks were as wide as the rail tracks, and one false move meant the driver could capsize. In fact, there are recorded anecdotes of tanks being unloaded from at Caboolture in quite an unusual fashion, sideways, backwards, forwards, every way but often the way they were meant to be unloaded. But nevertheless, they survived and came down at the now Bribie Island Road, which in those days was nothing but a bush track. In fact, it was put in by the Defence Services. So that in itself is history, that we continue along the track used some 50 years ago to bring in equipment, supplies and men to this point. My little note here says, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but my little note here says it was they were transported to Torble Point, nicknamed Terrible Point, but there would be some amongst us who would take offence at that. Torble Point throughout its existence was a transient place for Allied personnel to come and go in the course of their training. Australian tank crews were drawn from widely separated bases in Queensland and New South Wales. Royal Australian Navy sailors and commandos held joint exercises in Palmerston Passage and nearby estuarine areas. The tank crews joined the US Navy and Army forces in beach landing exercises. Although the tide of war gradually turned in favour of the Allies, the training centre continued to be maintained and upgraded. By 1944, the Japanese were continuing to retreat. The Torble Point Centre retained importance from the aspect of wartime water transport and training. It is believed that the Australian crews of the 24-tonne Matilda tanks and the US General Grant 28-tonne tanks were training for a huge assault exercise codenamed Zipper, which was to last 3 months. This was planned to overrun every Japanese-held position in the islands north of Australia, starting with Borneo. The dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima in August 1945 negated the cause for Exercise Zipper. Mr Donald, Councillor White, Mr Courtney, Major Rodriguez, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. General Douglas MacArthur, that will be known to everybody here, once said, and I quote, "In no other profession are the penalties for employing untrained personnel so irrevocable as they are in the Army." Now, Bribie Island, of course, and the Torble Point area was all about training during World War II. And the training that was done here saved innumerable lives in operations in the Pacific in the ensuing years. Of course, Bribie itself, as most will know, was home to artillery, radar facilities, communications centres, and much more than that. But it was principally to train people for amphibious operations in the Pacific area. And of course it still is, although the scale and the numbers of the Royal Australian Corps of Transport people, some of whom you see here on parade today, are vastly fewer than their forebears in the 1940s. In fact, vastly fewer is probably an understatement, because the scale of Bribie operations, I think, is itself very noteworthy. As Mr Ron Donald has pointed out in his excellent book, Fort Bribie, the United States Navy alone, without all the other contributing elements, had 10,000 people here in this area at one time during the war. That's just one element of the forces who are present in this area. Our core complement in the RACT these days for performing similar amphibious operations in 1995 is not 10,000 and the other tens of thousands who served here, but it's closer to 100, a slightly different and smaller number. Ladies and gentlemen, it's probably a blinding statement of the obvious to remind ourselves that Australia and its neighbours are all islands. For this reason alone, then, 50 years ago, as well as now, in 1995, the amphibious skills, which were practised then and are still practised now, are vital, and in the true sense of the word vital, to Australia's future. Did so much for our freedom so many years ago. Thank you.
is with great pride and honour to move a vote of thanks to so many people who have contributed to a great day. To Colonel Fowle, sir, our guest speaker, for his attendance, inspiring address, and the unveiling of this splendid monument we see before us to commemorate the Allied war effort in the Pacific Theatre and this training area in particular. Thank you, sir. Major Rodriguez, representing with members of the American Legion, United States of America personnel who trained here in amphibious and other operations before moving on to serve in the Pacific and islands to the north. Thank you for being with us. To the Australia Remembers Committee and the sub-branches of Return Services League in this Shire who decided to mark this special year of remembrance with the establishment of this monument honouring Australian and Allied Services personnel who passed through this area. This is one of several activities in this Remembrance Year. And a special thank you to the Bribie Island sub-branch, the Bribie Island RSL Citizens Memorial Club. To the residents of the Shire of Caboolture, our Mayor, Council and staff, who ably supported this worthy project as a permanent mark to honour and respect all ex-service men and women here and elsewhere. To Lieutenant Chris Smith and his fine body of men, the personnel of the 34th Water Transport Squadron, we thank you for your visit and the special arrangements you have made to be with us for this unique celebration. Your presence has provided additional colour, excitement and interest to this event. To the young people of the training ship Cooper and the Army Cadets, we acknowledge your fine turnout and your bearing, which has added much to this ceremony. The students of our local schools have been well to the fore in all of the ceremonies during this and prior years. And to those members of all service associations, some present here today, we are grateful for your contribution as well. To the sculptor Tom Farrell, whose talent, artistry and fine work has produced this splendid, innovative monument. Tom has made this practical, permanent tribute possible. To the Women's Auxiliary, members of the SES, and also our operator here on the sound equipment, and so many others who have played a part in today.
Hooray! Stand up! Hey!
That is the conclusion of the ceremony, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, thank you very, very sincerely for attending in such large numbers. Thank you.
Of a monument along the lines of what we have here now, acknowledging the existence of the Toorbul Point Amphibious Training Centre and the fact that many thousands of Australian and American personnel passed through this centre during the war.